final presentation before lunch. We're going to hear about automation as a growth engine, scaling bioinnovation from pilot to production. I'm delighted to welcome Ed Tschan, who's Business Development Leader at Novaspect, and Valerie Aubley, who's Business Development Manager at Emerson. So,
So, Valerie and I are acutely aware that we stand between you and lunch in just about 15 minutes, so we realize brevity is going to be the key today. So, thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to speak today. We would like to discuss automation as a key enabler to bioeconomy facilities. And those facilities are both pilot in nature as well as production in nature. And when Valerie and I get into the topic of automation, it's usually beneficial to help define automation. So we live in the world of OT, or operational technologies. Think production-oriented technologies, and therein you've got two flavors. You have traditional automation, which many of you might be aware of, things like process control, final control, think valves, actuators, regulators, instrumentation, reliability, things along those lines. And really over the last 5 to 7 years, you have the second flavor, which is a bit more spicy, and that's digital automation. Things like data analytics, data management, operational workflow. We want to touch on those two today, realizing that both are important to organizations, again, pilot-related, production-related, based upon where they are in their life cycle. So, again, in the interest of time, we really built an agenda that speaks to two things. Number one, fit. So if you look at the overview, Emerson overview, and the significance of automation, so where do we fit in the broader equation, and ultimately, where does the technology, where does automation fit in the broader spectrum? And then experientially, which may be of more value to everybody here, looking at the second two topics, what are the challenges in terms of scaling? What are the approaches to scaling from a customer perspective? And then ultimately, what do customers embody on their own roadmaps from a pilot perspective and production perspective? So again, fit and experience.
Awesome. So we figured we'd start things off with who is Emerson and really why are we here today? So Emerson is a global automation technology company, and we've been around since the 1890s. Overall, we have a global footprint about 130 manufacturing locations and a little bit over 70K employees. And really what our purpose is as a company is to provide innovative, high-quality technology from your plant floor, so think your instrumentation, your valves, your motors, all the way to your control room, which you can think of as kind of the brain of your facility, and then really to the data fabric that binds together all your different assets across the world or across a country to really bring the right data to the right person to make the right decisions. And the reason that Ed and I are really here today is Emerson has really tried to dial into the decarbonization landscape, and we put together this kind of a three-pillar framework of greening of, greening with, and greening by. So greening of is kind of us cleaning up our own house as a really large global company. So we have SBTI-approved goals for Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions to hit net zero operations by 2030, which we're on track for, as well as net zero supply chain by 2045. The other area of that pillar is greening with, so that's partnering with government organizations, NGOs, and academia to really further different decarbonization technology. And then that last pillar, greening by, is why Ed and I are here today. So it's understanding how can we work with customers and understand how can we help them scale up their technology and make the most of their investments throughout the entire life cycle of their scale-up process.
So you may have seen from the introduction a reference to two companies. You have Emerson and Novaspect. So Novaspect is one of 18 what are called impact partners. And what's important here is Emerson has global technology capabilities. We are a local organization, about 460 employees, 100 engineers, project managers. So we are the local touch point here in the Midwest. So if you orient on the map, number 12, that is Novaspect's geographic territory. So again, by design, by intention, global capabilities with local touch points across the life cycle.
Awesome. And then the other thing we want to touch on is, why are we talking about automation? Why is it important in this space? So kind of using an analogy of a human body, you can think of your senses as kind of like the instrumentation in your plant. So that's what's giving you all your input and letting you know what's really going on in the plant. And then your instrumentation, like your motors, your isolation valves, your control valves, those are like your muscles. That's what's actually making the actions and changing things in your plant. But what's governing all of that is your automation system. That's kind of serving as your central nervous system to be taking in the data, understanding what's going on. And from a process standpoint, are you improving your process? Are you making sure your throughput is as high quality as possible? And are you keeping your facility safe? So why is this a strategic important area for projects? So CII a couple years back did a overall analysis globally of what projects fail and which projects succeed. And they found that for mega projects, so above $1 billion CapEx, 65% come in, 25% over budget and 50% over schedule. And for large-scale projects, it hits that same metric about 35% of the time. And so when you're in the startup space, that's why it's really important to look at automation, because that's a key lever of coming in under budget and on time. There's different ways of doing parallel engineering processes, reducing your commissioning time, and even training your operators. So the people who are actually going to be running the plant, how do you make sure they're trained up and understand exactly how to safely operate the plant before things are actually up and running? So once you get the go, you can actually have product flowing through the plant. And so with automation, there's a lot of different tools within the life cycle of your scale-up process, going from bench to pilot to demo to mega facility, that you can kind of have in your tool bag to make sure that you're making the most of your capital and your time. So part of the work that Ed and I do with the clients we work with is kind of creating these automation roadmaps. The reason we chose to do this super busy slide is we know there's a lot of different factors that as a company you need to take into account, and part of navigating that and being a partner is understanding, where do you put your time and energy up front? Of course, it would be great to have a fully autonomous plant with AI and machine learning, but quite honestly, you don't need that in your very first demo project. But how do you lay the foundational building blocks so you can go up and running and make the most of your investment at every step, so you don't have to kind of start over each new phase of the project? And so what Ed and I do is kind of look at the overall portfolio of Emerson and the different subsidiary companies and really help you create that short, mid, and long-term automation roadmap.
So I'll embellish the roadmap topic for just a moment or two. If you look at Emerson and Novaspect, we have dedicated teams that will sit down with organizations and really look at a 1, 3, and 5-year automation roadmap. And as Valerie pointed out, it's as much facility-driven as it is technology-driven. And ultimately that wraps in your core production processes, your equipment, your instrumentation. But we've worked with organizations up to a 25-year automation roadmap. And granted, after 10 years, it might get a little hazy. But ultimately, what we want to do is have a compass pointing in a certain direction, looking at initial projects, implementations, the layering in of technologies over that 1, 3, 5, 10-year timeline, and ultimately the life cycle value of what's there. So technology moves obviously very quickly, and so the more that we can map out from a prediction standpoint, the better off. So, in this next slide really is taking it down to that level. So if you think of more the consultative piece of sitting down with an organization, again, dedicated teams to sit down and identify what technologies make sense at what level. Valerie and I have had multiple conversations already today with organizations that are early stage, trying to cultivate their processes, cultivate the science. So looking at what works in the lab, what works then in a pilot plant, and ultimately how do you transition that out to a production facility. So consulting, certainly, project planning, implementation, life cycle, as I mentioned, kind of post-implementation. And then, of course, maybe most importantly, having an educational program for the engineering team members, the operation team members that are involved with running those technologies.
So Emerson has been around for quite a while, and especially with our focus within kind of the energy transition space, we've had the opportunity to work with a lot of pilots. And this screen kind of gives a summary of some of the core challenges that we see, but the thread that ties all of these together is really how do you make the most of your investment and make sure you can apply those learnings to the next phase, right? So when you're at the pilot phase, you want to make sure that you're gathering the right amount of data, that you're building like an analytical platform to understand what's going on in each phase of your process. And then how do you build, for example, a simulation model to understand as you scale up, maybe as feedstock changes, or maybe as your derivative products change, how can you understand how to go forward with that? So really our job is, with that roadmap that Ed was talking about, how can you look at where you are today and then making sure you can continue to apply those learnings going forwards?
Maybe a tangible example, if you look at the easy scaling from pilot to production, we've worked the last couple of years to look specifically at process control, maybe as one of those core technologies, operational technologies. We actually have a plug-and-play offering from a process control perspective, which allows all the functionality of an advanced distributed control system, hardware, software, implementation, the enclosure, the support, the licensing, all of that for under $38,000. All designed for a pilot plant, all designed then to set the stage for data capture, single database orientation, all the features, functions, and attributes that can then be transitioned out seamlessly to the next stage from either a pilot perspective or a production perspective. So importantly, from a best practice perspective, we embrace that. We look to have solutions specifically designed for early stage.
So we want to kind of put together a roadmap of, with the different startups we've worked with, where we can get engaged and what we've kind of done. So at the early side of things, we can kind of get involved on the design side. So we've worked with some companies out of startup incubators where they're saying, okay, we have this pretty manual lab bench process, but how do we automate it and get as much data as possible? So we kind of sit down in a workshop, look at their P&IDs and understand, what data are you trying to capture? Okay, what instrumentation do you need? How often do you want all that data gathered? Do you want it, every second, every minute, every hour, every day, et cetera? And then kind of create the plant design from there. Other times we can get involved when you're doing, let's say, like a demo project. Let's say you got contracted by a pulp and paper mill or an oil and gas company, and you want to understand how do you integrate your almost OEM package into this larger scale facility, right? And a huge part of that is data integration, right? Like how do you plug your system into the electrical environment, make sure it's not going to have any interference, all that jazz. So we help on that side of things. And then we also help on the execution side. So let's say you're doing a mega project and want to understand how do you get in on time and under budget when you're doing this, and that's another area we can help. And then Ed can also go over some of the other tools we have in our box for that.
Oh, this might be the older one. Just going to click through briefly. There we go. Go for it.
All right. So again, very briefly, if you look at an approach to a facility, what you're seeing on this slide is you can start with PLC capabilities, programmable logic controllers, which is one type of process control. You can start with a Delta V distributed control system. Each are very relevant for the types of facilities and processes you have. But ultimately, you want to get into a position where you're standardizing your technology. And again, you're planning for the future in terms of how to reduce complexity and ultimately make yourself agile in the process. And of course, reduce cost. One more slide to that end. If you look at Emerson and Novaspect, we continue to invest in interface solutions and analysis solutions that allow you to take an existing facility technology and do what I just mentioned. How do you move that seamlessly to the next phase? How do you move that from platform A to platform B? Those tools are all there. And importantly, you get an early look at the complexity from a technical perspective. You get an early look at what scheduling needs to happen and ultimately the cost that might be involved for that. So very much upfront awareness, which is the key.
And then this is one of our last content slides, and what we really wanted to kind of end out with is a bit of a case study. So back in the early 2000s, we had the opportunity to start working with a biofuel company that was based in the Midwest and had maybe one or 1 to 3 bioprocessing facilities from corn and soybean to overall bioethanol. And at the time, they're doing things pretty manually, so like manual data collection, manual monitoring of like the different equipment, making sure it's being healthy, et cetera. And at that time, they had a lot of like off-spec product. There's a lot of room for growth, right? And so this was back in the early 2000s. And from there, we've had almost 25, this year will be 25 years working with that customer. And we now manage 35 of their facilities across North America. And they're one of the world's leaders in biofuel production. And so we want to use this as an example because we're willing to kind of invest and grow with our clients. And we really want to see this biofuel space succeed. And some of the areas that we worked with them on was kind of standardizing and creating a customizable like training courses for all of their operators. It was looking at kind of automating a lot of their maintenance rounds, so they didn't have to have an engineer going into the site routinely. They only had to go out when there's like a sensor saying that you need to, say, check a bearing on this motor. But the idea is, how do you make the most of your investment? How do you use your people kind of in the best way that they can be used? And then the examples you see on this other side of the screen are some of our more recent examples of either working with academic startups or larger utility companies that are trying to pilot out different programs.
Thank you.